Running through the storm. Location: Central London. Anyone who thought sunshine symbolized pure joy had clearly never run in the rain. That was the conclusion Anju came to late one Friday evening, November 13th, as she and Kia dashed through the soaking streets of central London. Kia had laughed off Anju's protest about the rain, insisting, "A little rain never hurt anyone." Then, without a second thought, she had grabbed Anju's hand and taken off, running without direction or motive through the storm. Anju could do nothing but follow, her fingers slipping through Kia's soaked but determined grip as they wound their way through the bustling London streets. The city buzzed with life despite the downpour. A sea of umbrellas bobbed above the heads of hurried pedestrians, while red double-decker buses and cabs honked impatiently in a standstill of traffic. Anju's wet shoes splashed in puddles, the water seeping up through her socks, but somehow, none of that mattered. It was a scene Anju had always associated with the gray monotony of urban life. London had once seemed to her like a concrete jungle, littered with trash, pigeons scavenging for crumbs, smog hanging in the air, and the sounds of cars and people blending into an overwhelming cacophony. But tonight, running alongside Kia, London felt different. It was vibrant, alive, bursting with energy. Kia had always been a force of nature, and tonight was no exception. Her skin glistened under the rain, her waist-length braids swaying behind her like a banner of joy. Anju couldn't help but be drawn into her orbit, forgetting the cold, forgetting the fatigue, forgetting everything except the thrill of the moment. They didn't stop until the city streets gave way to quieter alleys, where the crowds thinned out and the noise faded into the background. Kia finally slowed down, tugging Anju into the shelter of a narrow alleyway. Their hands slipped apart, and Anju caught her breath, her heart still racing, not just from the run, but from the feeling of being close to Kia. Anju's blonde hair clung wetly to her face, her school uniform drenched and clinging awkwardly to her frame. It was then that the old doubts began to creep back in. The brief euphoria of their sprint faded, replaced by the familiar discomfort of self-consciousness. "Why did we do that?" Anju asked, half laughing, half questioning, as she wiped the rain from her face. Kia grinned, her dark eyes gleaming with mischief. "Because we can," she said simply. "Sometimes you just have to run through the rain. You can't always wait for the storm to pass." Anju shook her head, but she couldn't help but smile. Kia had that effect on her, always pulling her out of her shell, pushing her to experience life instead of hiding from it. "You're crazy," she said, but there was no malice in her voice. Kia leaned back against the brick wall, her braids dripping water onto her shirt. "You worry too much, Anju. Life is short, you know? You've got to live it. Who cares about a little rain or what people think?" Anju felt a flicker of warmth inside her. Kia was right. She always had been. It wasn't just about the rain, it was about everything. About living the life she wanted, not the one everyone expected her to live. About embracing the parts of herself she had been too afraid to show, even to herself. It wasn't the first time Anju had thought about it, about her feelings for Kia. There had been so many moments over the past few months when she'd caught herself stealing glances at her, heart skipping a beat when their eyes met, feeling something unfamiliar but undeniable. It had confused her, scared her even. But tonight, running through the rain, with Kia's laughter echoing in her ears, Anju felt something shift. She looked up at Kia, her heart pounding in her chest for reasons that had nothing to do with the sprint. Kia's grin softened into a smile, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to pause. "Kia," Anju started, her voice barely above a whisper. Kia stepped closer, her eyes full of understanding, as if she already knew what Anju was struggling to say. She reached out and gently took Anju's hand again, her fingers warm against the cold dampness of the rain. "You don't have to say anything," Kia said softly. And in that moment, Anju realized she didn't. Words weren't necessary. It was in the way Kia held her hand, in the way she had always been there, in the way she made Anju feel alive. It was enough. They stood there for a moment longer, the rain still pouring down, the city still buzzing around them. But all that mattered was the two of them, standing together, holding on to something they both knew was real, something Anju had been too afraid to acknowledge until now. Maybe it wouldn't be easy. Maybe there were still storms ahead. But as long as Kia was by her side, Anju knew she could face them. After all, sometimes you just had to run through the rain. And with Kia, Anju was ready to run. Anju squeezed Kia's hand, as if grounding herself to the reality of the moment, but her thoughts were racing faster than her breath had moments ago. Kia had always had a way of making her feel more alive than anyone else. That much was clear from the very beginning. Their first meeting in the school library over a worn trigonometry textbook. While other students whispered about tests and weekend plans, Kia had drawn a constellation of doodles in her notebook, her confidence unbothered by any expectations around them. Anju had watched her then, intrigued but hesitant, too unsure of herself to engage with someone so free-spirited, so fearless. Over time, though, their conversations had deepened, pulling Anju into a world she hadn't even known she needed. Earth to Anju. Kia's teasing voice broke through her reverie, and Anju realized she had been staring. "Sorry," Anju muttered, her cheeks burning despite the cold rain. "I was just thinking." "Thinking? What could possibly be on your mind at a time like this?" Kia's grin widened, and she tugged at Anju's hand again, pulling her out from the shelter of the alley. "Come on, let's walk. You're always in your head." Anju let herself be led, their footsteps now slower, calmer, as they wove through the quiet streets. The rain had lightened to a gentle drizzle, but the cold air nipped at their wet skin. Anju shivered slightly, and without a word, Kia pulled her closer, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it sent a wave of warmth through Anju's body, easing the tension she hadn't realized she was carrying. "You know," Kia started after a moment, her voice softer now, "you don't have to worry so much about what people think about us." She glanced sideways at Anju, her expression more serious than usual. Anju's heart skipped a beat. She knew Kia was right, had known it for a long time really, but hearing it said aloud made everything feel more real. She bit her lip, her mind swirling with thoughts of her family, her friends, the unspoken expectations that had always hovered over her like a shadow. But here, in this quiet moment with Kia, those thoughts seemed less daunting, less insurmountable. "I know," Anju said finally, her voice quiet. "It's just, I've spent so long trying to be the person everyone expects me to be. I don't even know how to be anyone else." Kia stopped walking, turning to face her. Her gaze was intense but kind, her hands resting on Anju's shoulders. "You don't have to figure it all out right now. But you don't have to pretend either. Not with me." She gave a small smile, her fingers brushing a wet strand of hair from Anju's face. I like you just the way you are, even when you're overthinking everything. Anju let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, a weight lifting off her chest at Kia's words. The rain continued to patter softly around them, but the world felt still, as if it was holding its breath, waiting for her next move. I like you too, Kia, Anju said, the words slipping out before she could second-guess them. It was the first time she had said it out loud, the first time she had let herself admit what had been simmering beneath the surface for months. Kia's eyes softened, and for a moment, she simply looked at Anju, as if weighing her response. Then, with a gentle smile, she leaned in, resting her forehead against Anju's. I know. They stood like that for a long moment, their breaths mingling in the cool air, the space between them charged with unspoken understanding. Anju felt the warmth of Kia's presence seep into her, calming the storm of emotions that had been swirling inside her for so long. I'm scared, Anju admitted quietly, her voice barely a whisper. I know, Kia replied, her voice steady. But we'll figure it out. Together. It was such a simple statement, but it filled Anju with a sense of peace she hadn't known she needed. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was facing the world alone. She had Kia, and that was enough. They resumed their walk, the rain now little more than a soft mist around them, the city quieting as the night deepened. Anju's mind, usually a whirlwind of thoughts, felt strangely calm. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or how her family or friends would react, but right now, that didn't matter. As they passed a small corner cafe, still glowing with warm light despite the late hour, Kia paused, glancing inside. Want to get something warm? Hot chocolate, maybe? Anju nodded, grateful for the change of pace. They stepped inside, the warmth of the cafe immediately enveloping them, the scent of coffee and freshly baked pastries filling the air. They found a small table near the window, and as they sat down, Kia ordered 2 hot chocolates, her smile never faltering. The drinks arrived quickly, steam rising from the mugs, and Anju wrapped her hands around hers, savoring the warmth. They sipped in comfortable silence for a while, watching the rain continue to fall outside, the world seeming softer, quieter from inside the cozy cafe. So, Kia said eventually, breaking the silence, "What do you think? About us?" Anju looked down at her mug, the swirl of whipped cream melting into the hot chocolate. It was a big question, one she had been avoiding for weeks, maybe even months. But sitting here, with Kia across from her, it didn't feel as overwhelming as it once had. I think, Anju began, choosing her words carefully. I think I don't know what's going to happen next. But I know I want you in my life, however that looks. Kia's smile widened, her eyes lighting up with that familiar spark. That's good enough for me. They finished their drinks, the warmth from the cafe, and the conversation settling into Anju's bones. As they stood to leave, Anju realized that, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't dreading what came next. She didn't have all the answers, and she still had doubts and fears. But with Kia by her side, she felt ready to face whatever storms life threw at her. Because sometimes, you didn't wait for the storm to pass. Sometimes, you learned to dance in the rain.